Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope everyone is well today. My name is Nazaka, and I'm calling from the UK. Today, we are going to do a webinar on, we're going to continue on the subject of Are You Divinely Guided? And this is the third webinar on this topic. And today, we are going to focus on question and answers that have emerged from the last two webinars and also any questions that might emerge today. I would also like to ask if anybody would like to ask their own questions, they can just put that in the message or in the question, and then we can enable you to ask the question yourself. Otherwise, I can read it for you. That's no problem. I will now hand this over to Dr. Umar.
Thank you very much. Mualakam assalam to you, Brother Nazakat, and everyone who's joined us. May it please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to join us and to grant us His grace and His clarity of thought and direction and guidance as we are pursuing His truth. He is the truth. So let us proceed to try and answer the many questions that were submitted to us these last couple of weeks. And if we have more than we can handle today, then what we'll do is we'll continue this Q&A again next week if there's an interest in doing so, and if you would like to do that, let us know. So, Brother Nazakat, I'll hand the floor back over to you. Inshallah, let us proceed.
So, just seeing if there's any new questions coming up. Um, yeah. So, there's a question. So, divine manhood, where to start? That's the question.
Oh, dear. Divine manhood. Well, let's start with manhood as we know it before we get to do the divine part. Manhood as we know it is full of trial and error, which is one of the reasons we're here in the earth, because we failed the first test, and the first test was that of obedience. Now we have the second test, and the second test is that of looking for the guidance so that we can then become obedient, you see. This search for the guidance is one of trial and error because we're in a place that is governed by darkness. We're not walking in the garden anymore. And we can, but that depends on our degree of obedience, our degree of discernment. And by discernment, what I mean is our degree of careful searching, our degree of education, of gaining knowledge, of understanding. These sorts of things are all part of what we need to survive here in an environment which is hostile. The earth is beautiful, but is also hostile. When we compare this to the garden, the stories of the garden, the myths of the garden, whatever that reality is, it was not hostile. You see, there's no indication that anything that was in the garden prior to our earthly descent, Adam's earthly descent, was hostile. Everything was there arranged as we would arrange to educate any child, you see. And there's no indication, just for those of you who may consider these things, that Allah was not going to inform Adam or our race um, about evil. It just wasn't time yet. I mean, there's a time, for example, in the development of a child, an earthly child here, who's on that search, who's on that path, who's a wayfarer in the becoming, um, when we don't mention evil things to them. We have to wait until they are ready to receive them, until they have gained enough knowledge to understand the conversation that's about to be had regarding evil things. So, just because Adam disobeyed doesn't mean that Adam was not going to be educated, and there's evidence of that in our Quran as well, when it speaks of Harut and Marut teaching men about these evil things, and they were there by Allah's will. So um, one has to consider all of these things when you're trying to answer this question. Oh, it's a loaded question, such a simple line, but there's so much to be considered when you answer this question. So, to be a man, first of all, on the earth, let's not talk about manhood in the pre primordial existence when we all stood and acknowledged that God was our God, our provider, our creator. But here on earth, we seem to forget that acknowledgement, at least most men do, and we have to rise to the challenge of manhood here. And the first degree of arising to this challenge and meeting the challenge and overcoming it is that of the beastly nature, that of the nafs. You see, we have to take that club and we have to kill the saber-toothed tiger or whatever it is that's threatening us, and that's beast against beast. And then comes the challenge of civilization afterwards, and we all are familiar with some of that history. With along with the challenge of establishing civilization, we have the challenge of beginning to become moral, morally considerate, ethically considerate of others. But even that does not concern things that we might consider to be divine. Because when you're moral and when you're ethical, what you're doing is you're protecting yourself from hostile neighbors by trying to placate them, by trying to consider their needs so that they don't rise up against you. That's still the selfish virtue, you see. It's still the selfish attribute. You don't become divine until you start to obey Allah in lieu of death, you see. In other words, you don't become regenerated. You don't become um, the heavenly regenerate human being or truly human until you're ready to die for righteousness, for the sake of righteousness. And the ultimate sake of righteousness is that of being obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you see. And why do you want to do that? Because the whole point, you see, of becoming a divinely righteous man is to return to the garden so that we walk without these earthly challenges anymore, so that we can continue the lesson that Adam abandoned when he ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Up to that point, he was eating from the tree of good. All the trees in the garden were teaching him, were educating him, and these trees were creatures, perhaps other human beings, perhaps angels, perhaps what kind of creatures we don't know, because the allegory in all of the scripture is that a tree represents a being. What kind of being? I don't know. I'm not going to try to interpolate there. But Adam was learning. He was eating. The allegory is that of eating knowledge, you see, which is why you're here, all of you, asking these questions, you see. Allah has given me some knowledge and I'm trying to feed you. So that makes me a tree and I'm trying to bear only good fruit with the help of Allah. So I'm trying to become one of these regenerate men that you're seeking in this answer. So to be a divine man means to be completely and totally regenerate. That doesn't mean perfect. That means someone who's really striving to do what might be considered perfect because only Allah is perfect. We are not, you see. So um, this has to do with selflessness. so that the divinely regenerated man is selfless. He doesn't think about himself first, he thinks about God first, his responsibilities towards heaven first, and then how he can manifest that responsibility through the deen, you see. And the first thing that he has to do in the deen, according to all of the apostles, is to be good to his wife, then to be good to his children, and then to be good to his neighbors, you see, and then even to be good to his enemies, you see. The Prophet made that very clear in his acts of war, you see, and many Muslims have forgotten this kind of mercy. You see, so if you're not dispensing mercy, if you're not dispensing goodness, especially to your closest companion, who is your wife, without whom you cannot complete the deen, you see, you cannot be guided. You cannot then become divine. So I hope that begins to answer this question of manhood. Alhamdulillah.
Do we have any more questions? So you've got to bear with me. This is a bit of a long one.
Sure.
So from Rebecca, Salam, Omar Zaid, I have watched just about every video multiple times. As much as I am relieved and comforted by most of what you bring, there is a huge concern with your approach, which I will be grateful to finally hear your side of it. So my question is, knowing how corrupted much the other revelation, i.e., other than the Quran alone, humanity has, why do you keep getting more and more indignant and about not knowing a great deal of the Quran? This is very important for your own self because there are still major concepts that you have based on the other books in which the Quran negates, but you are entirely unaware of it while growing arrogant in what knowledge you do have. Salam.
Oh, that's a pretty good question. It indicates that I'm misunderstood by some listeners. I'm not the least bit interested in not learning from the Quran. Matter of fact, I pursue that knowledge almost on a daily basis, uh, usually in the company of my wife as we study together. So that's a fallacy. It's not true. Um, the Quran does not negate the books uh, that came before, the Torah and the New Testament. It does not negate them. The Quran specifically states, to the best of my knowledge, that it came to complete them or perhaps to correct them, you see, perhaps both, you see. So if one doesn't have knowledge of what came before, then that means you do not know what is being completed. And what is being completed is the dhikr, the story of mankind and his relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what's being completed. And not all of that story is given in the Quran. It's simply not there. We have some adjustments, we have some indication that the Quran disagrees with certain passages in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, but it does not negate them. And I'm well aware that much of what is in the Quran, in the Old Testament, the Al Torah, what is called Al Kitab, um, uh, has been toyed with, has been trifled with, has been twisted. But there are great many passages that have not been touched, and they've not been twisted, they've not been toyed with. And the reason being is that the people who manage these lies simply thought way back when when they were doing these things that most men were never going to read those passages, you see. And thanks to the arduous good labor of certain amongst the Christians and the Jews who did do what was needed to be done to translate these things and preserve them as best as they possibly could. They're not all bad people, by the way. You know, some of them may be misguided in some of their theology, but they mean well and they truly try to do the best that they possibly can. And there are passages that fit perfectly well with what is in the Quran, and I showed you that in last week's webinar. I showed that very clearly. And if you haven't seen that webinar, dear Rebecca, please have a look at it. It's online. You're welcome to review it and then maybe restate your question. Thank you very much.
Jazakallah. Our government in Sweden had just put out a prepare folder for us. What to buy and store if the economic collapse come or invasion happens. How should a Muslim think?
Well, it's not just Muslims, it's anybody who's going to respond to such a question like that, a directive like that. What's happening is real. And I've seen this coming for years, for decades. It's now upon us. The shortages are just around the corner. The monetary crisis is just around the corner. The supply lines are being cut and they're being purposely cut. So it is best to prepare and prepare as best you can. Now, what this also means to prepare to die and to die well. It won't be an easier, pleasant experience, but mm, we're all going to die anyway. So you might as well become the warrior that you admire in all those movies you like to watch. You see, you might as well say today's a good day to die and realize that there will come a knock on your door at some point, and it will be a government agent, most likely in some form of jackboot with a uniform on, who salutes the flag and says, "Yes, sir. How high do you want me to jump, sir?" And knocks on your door and says, "Come with us." Now, I've always been asked this question, what should we do? And in conjunction with that question, what should we do, is why do you do what you do, Dr. Omar? Because if what you're saying is inevitable, well, then why bother? Well, we're talking about strength of character here. And if you want to truly strengthen your character, you have to do it with faith. And faith without works is something that is not acceptable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because all we do when we die is take our works, our good deeds with us, or our bad deeds as well, you see. So if you're going to be put up against that wall or put in a concentration camp, which is likely going to happen to many of you, because they're going to sort you out. They're going to sort out which ones are going to be obedient pawns and which ones are going to be troublemakers like me. And they'll, you know, they'll make us more than expendable. They'll turn us into fertilizer. Okay. That's what their intentions are. These people are serious. There's no joke about this. So your response has to be serious. And you can't be serious if you meet them in fear. So if that knock on the door comes like a good Nazi at 3 o'clock in the morning, or a Stasi like 3 o'clock in the morning, or any time, morning, afternoon, or evening, or night, it doesn't make any difference. Whenever they come, you have to meet them fearlessly. And if you want to meet them fearlessly, it doesn't mean you have to be prepared to die. It means you have to be prepared to meet your death with knowledge and understanding. And you face them as you would, like many of the saints, and say, "Thank you for sending me to heaven. It's a good deed you're doing for me, not for you." If you're not prepared to meet them with that kind of stolid courage, then, store everything that you possibly can and hide in some hole in the cellar. They're still going to find you. They will find you see. So you do the best you can to survive under the best conditions you can until you can't anymore. It's very simple. It's very simple. And then all that while, you see, all right, let's see, you've got, maybe you've got 20 people in the cellar with you and you got 10 cans of sardines. You see, so you're going to have to divvy them out piece by piece. And it generally means that in the end, you're going to be leaving the sardines for the children because they'll have the best chance of survival. You see, you want to save the seed. Now, that brings me to another aspect of this question. You see, there are some of us that Allah chooses to save the seed, just like Prophet Noah. You understand? You build an ark and you pray that Allah will have mercy to float it through the coming flood, through the coming tsunami. You don't count on Allah to float it because He decides whose seed is worth saving, not you. So the point in response to this very serious question is survive, live, and live well, and live the best you possibly can until you can't anymore. It's real simple. And be prepared to meet that dumb fool who's going to stick a bullet in your brain or a bayonet through your heart. Stand there and know that you're going to meet your Maker as a Sahid. Do not surrender to fear. Surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and show that you have real faith. Show that you fully expect His angel to catch your soul and take you to Jannah. Next question, please.
How do we align our will with Allah's will?
Ah, that's a very good question. And I'm not sure that I have given that any thought or contemplation in recent days or months, even. It seems to be something that I just myself do as best I can on a daily basis. What you want to do in order to do this is to decrease the level of interference. You see, what I mean by that is to decrease the level of inhibitions to your communication, your connection, your solat with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the more that you are connected to the world and worldly deeds and worldly ambitions, the less you're going to be connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see? Now, this has everything to do with meeting your destiny. And most people do not know what their destiny is because, now listen to me carefully, they are in the wrong place with the wrong people doing the wrong things. So, I began to align myself with Allah's will so that I can meet my destiny. And I could probably give you a long biographical dissertation here, but I won't. Um, I began to do this by making a specific prayer, and I've shared this prayer with a few close companions. And I think they're beginning to find that it works. I became so exasperated by the many errors I made in my life, both in deed and thought, that at one point, and this is going more than 20 years ago, and even before I became a Muslim, I asked God to put far from me the people, places, and things and thoughts that are not mine by His will, and to bring close to me the people, places, and things and thoughts and knowledge that are mine by His will, so that I can meet my destiny. Now, I had an inkling of what my destiny was, and that inkling led me to writing. And writing was something that I had done uh, naturally as a child. You see, I won my first essay contest when I was 12 years old. And what was the topic? The topic was China. Now, how many kids you know write about geopolitical topics when they're 12 years old? I don't know any, but I did. And I complained to high heavens. Well, at that time, the high heavens reached as far as my parents and my teachers, you see, the Catholic Church that I attended at the time, the nuns and the priests. And I complained to high heaven about why it is that the American government had sold China over to the communists, you see. Now, in my little brain and my little learning at the time, I didn't know much about the Kuomintang and the Mao Zedong and communism and all this sort of thing. I just knew it was wrong. And I won the contest. But you know what? I stopped writing. And why did I stop writing? I stopped because nobody answered my question, you see. And I won the contest. I even managed to get a bit of a scholarship of sorts going on into the next part of my education. But no teacher, no nun, no priest, no parent, no uncle, no aunt, no big brother or sister ever answered my question. Why did the American government do that? So now I'm sitting here 60 years later, and I have some of the answers. And the reason I had the answers is because this has always been my destiny. It was always in my heart to ask such questions and to seek out the answers. And after a personal crisis some years ago, an elder, a professional, advised me to return to what was in my heart and to become the writer I always wanted to be, secretly wanted to be, you see. So then, in anticipation of making that journey, I asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it possible. And that prayer was necessary in order to remove the hindrances between me and Him so that I would be clearly guided on this path without any question. Because when you're guided, there's a couple of things that allow you to pursue what appears to be the impossible. One is certainty that you're doing the right thing. The other thing is peace and security when you see that your prayers are answered and you see that Allah makes it possible for you against all odds, you see. And I have lived that, I have seen it. And I'm here as a proof that Allah does guide us, that Allah does answer prayers, and Allah does give us what we ask for if it is in fact according to His will for us to meet our destiny. Once you're on that path, there's no one going to stop you. Nobody. Only Allah Himself can do that. So I hope that answers that question. Next question, please.
We have a brother here. I don't know if he wants to ask his own question.
Salam alaikum, brother. Please go on. Introduce yourself, please. Your microphone is muted.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
All good. You can hear me. Hey,
Yes,
brother
yes, I
Zaid.
can. Yes, how
Jazakallah.
are you?
Alhamdulillah.
Walaikum
I just want.
assalam.
Yes, I came kind of late to this webinar, but I just wanted to say I was grateful to be able to just speak to you briefly for this little time. Um, I've heard about your books. I've downloaded some to my phone, and I did have a lot of questions. I can't cover it now, but I just had a simple question now. Would if you could cover those of us living in the cities and are planning, hopefully, to get to a place where we could make hijrah to more of a rural setting and start living more of our fitra and natural way. For those who are living in the cities, I mean, it is difficult for some of us to try to transition to that who aren't used to country life and that kind of thing. But there is hope, I think, would you say, for the city people now in this time, because there are good people still in the cities and there's still communities and ways to live Islam and to practice your fitrah. I mean, you can travel to the country every now and then just to get free of the concrete jungle, so to speak. But is it still hope for those of us who aren't really right now to make that transition and are still making jihad in the cities and living Islam?
Well, this is something I can't answer um, out of primary knowledge. I can give you an opinion. And I
Sure.
remember you now, Brother Rosario, Angelo.
Yes, sir.
Well, yeah,
Yes, sir.
you called me
Alhamdulillah.
the other day. Alhamdulillah.
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes, it's
Yes.
very good to see you.
Alhamdulillah. Likewise.
Now, what you have in the city is you're already compromised, and the fact that there are good people there, that's fine. There are good people in every war situation who get caught up in it. You see,
Yes.
and they get destroyed no matter what they do in preparations. I mean, look at the people of Dresden. I mean, in Germany during the Second World War, hundreds of thousands were all burnt to a crisp, at a moment's notice, without any. I mean, I know I lived in Germany for a couple of years when I was a soldier. Germans are good people. They're not the people that they're not the Nazis that people make them out to be. That's all
Oh
part
yeah.
of
No.
propaganda, you see. And there are lots of good people and children. And how can you say that children are bad? You can't.
Right.
So they get caught up in this, and this is a thing of national destiny. You see. So
Yes.
let me try and explain this to you so that you have a sort of an understanding what's going on. You see, the people that you've been obedient to have been wicked leaders or irresponsible leaders. And you've been following them. You've been paying their taxes and saluting their flags and, following their system and using their banking and riba and all this sort of thing. And when judgment comes, it comes to everyone who's been obedient to them. You see, that's just the way it is. So you have to the first thing you have to do under a situation like this is ask Allah's forgiveness, you see, even for sins you didn't know you committed. And most people under those circumstances don't know that they've been committing sin. You see,
Yes.
when you live under wicked leadership and there's three things the Prophet said you have to do. First of all, forbid it with the sword if you can. Secondly,
Yeah.
forbid it with the word, if you cannot do it with the sword. And thirdly, forbid it in your heart. Well, listen, most people I know have not been doing any of the above.
Mm-hmm.
And the third one is the least that you can do, but at least it's acknowledged by Allah subhanahu as some sort of effort on your part to
Yeah.
avoid the evil.
Yes, the weakest part. Yes.
Yeah, it's the weakest part of this form
But it's
of
something.
jihad. It's something, yeah. So then the next thing you need to do is you sort of need to band together and say, okay, look, we're all going down one way or the other. And so let's go down with dignity.
Yeah.
Okay. So you choose a leader, then you choose a place to make your last stand. And like I said a few minutes ago when I answered another question, you live as long as you can and as well as you can, performing as many good deeds as you possibly can until you can't anymore. And then
Hmm.
you die with dignity. That's all there is to it. There's not
Yeah.
much else you can do. As for making hijra to some sort of rural place, listen, a lot of people talk about that, but you've got to be prepared to do that.
Yeah.
Most people I know are not prepared to do that. I
Right.
saw a video about some Muslims in another country, and they all got fired up about Imran Hussein, and they started to go do this sort of thing, the Muslim village. And
Yes.
you got all these big pot-bellied imams out there with a shovel trying to clear land, and they pick up the shovel or the axe and they start
Yeah.
going it, and
Make an
15
effort.
minutes
Yeah.
later, 15 minutes later, they can't do it anymore. They're worn out. They're not prepared. They're
Yeah.
not prepared physically, mentally, or spiritually to do what's necessary. It's hard.
Yeah. It's
It's
not easy.
not it's not easy, okay?
Yeah.
So then there's
Well, it's a
another thing.
transition. It's a transition. It's like when you work out, you have to build up to that and at least
Yeah,
making
well,
an
all
effort.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, you better start now. Don't just talk about it. You got to better start now. And the other thing
Yes.
is that, if you're going to go someplace, you have to be invited.
Oh
Okay.
yeah.
You just can't turn up someplace and plop yourself down and say, "Hey, look, I'm here. I'm on Hijra, and I'm here to survive." Okay.
Yeah. You got to make a
Especially,
contribution. Yeah.
you got to make a contribution to the community. You got to fit in. Okay.
Yes.
And you have to respect the local peoples. I mean, if let's just say, okay, you're someplace in Pakistan, and there's lots of mountain valleys up there that I'm sure Allah's going to protect, regardless of how stupid and foolish their imams are, because there's a lot of good people there. All right.
Hmm.
Now, let's just say you turn up in one of these mountain valleys and you show yourself to the local tribal chief and you beg mercy. The first thing the chief's going to say is, "What do you got for us? What's in it for us?" Okay. You
Hmm.
don't just turn up someplace and expect people to serve you. You got to be willing to give. And what are you going to give? What are you going to contribute in
Hmm.
return for their protection and grace and favor? You see,
Right.
all of which proceed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you
Yeah.
can't adopt this independent American mindset and just turn up and plop
Here I
yourself
am.
someplace. Here I am. No, Allah has to make it clear to you where to
Yeah.
go, when to go, and with whom. The contacts
Right.
have to be made. And he does this. I've experienced this with my wife when we made our hijrah here to Kentucky. And this is just over a year ago. We had
Hmm.
dreams and visions that confirmed this thing. And
Hmm.
then we arrived here and met with people who also confirmed it,
Hmm.
various means. So there are signs that take place and that occur all the way. And you can't, I'll give you an example of one dream that I had. Okay.
Hmm.
Because I'm on one side of the world, my wife is on the other side of the world, and we're figuring out, okay, how are we going to do this thing? And so I have some ideas of what to do, where to go, where to look, but I don't know exactly where. And
Hmm.
so she starts looking, and I start looking, and we can't find this place anywhere. We know it exists. And then one day I have a dream. And in this dream, I'm flying with her. Now, listen to me carefully, dear people. This is how I know that Allah guides me. I have primary experience. I'm in this dream with her, and we're flying. And we're flying over a city. And it's not a city that I know. I don't know the city. I've never been there before, and it's by a river. And we're flying in a particular direction. And I remember this dream very, very clearly. And I woke up from this dream and I said, "This is where we've got to find this place in order to find where it is that we have to go." And I told her. And so I start looking online for pictures of the silhouette of the city. And I finally find it about a month later. And it's Cincinnati.
Oh, wow.
And we were flying in direction that shows that we were flying southeast of the city by the river, according to the directions I remember. And I said, somewhere southeast of the city, we're going to find where we go, where we need to go. And within that week, she found a place, and we had been looking for months.
Alhamdulillah.
We
Wow.
we found the place right away. Not only did we find the school that we needed for her son, we found the place that we're living now. And all of it was done within a week of her arrival in this place to talk with the people and talk with the real estate agents and make the connections. And it was exactly where I determined it was going to be according to that dream. You see, so
Wow.
if
So that
you're
place is like a metaphorical of your dream. I mean, you're connected with spirit, man. That's that's inspiring, brother.
yes, this is,
Yeah.
I have other experiences like that, Brother Rosario, that I can then explain to you. So, in answer to your
Wow.
question, unless you have some sort of very clear signs, either a vision or a dream or a sequence of events, you can also discern God's will by a sequence of events and people. Maybe somebody that you've dismissed in the past, and they come back to you with the same inquiry or the same advice or whatever it might be. Often, when Allah wants you to do something, He will bring that thing back to you, even if you dismiss it on more than one occasion.
To learn from the
See,
lesson. Yeah.
you learn the lesson and you will get a direction. So,
Yeah.
if you don't have, first of all, you have to have the means to do it. Then, secondly, you have to have the direction. You have to have some sort of direction. And I'm talking about
Guidance. Yeah.
something that you can accept as guidance and confirm as guidance, because we confirmed along the way, along this particular path, between my wife and myself, we confirmed dozens of signs having to do with all kinds of little things that we discerned along the way and said, yes, this is it, this is it. And then once you have this confirmation, you're filled with certainty, so that you
Mm.
join your faith with certainty, and then the actions just follow. And then
Wow.
once you, and the other thing is, without action, nothing happens. I've known people who have talked and talked and talked till they're blue in the face until I'm sick of listening to them, and they never take action. They
Mhm.
never take action. I had a person who contacted me just a short while ago and said, I'm living under oppression. I have this problem, and the men treat me so poorly. Da 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 da. I said, well, I know someone who needs a wife now. And immediately she said, oh, I can't be a wife. I can't do this, or that, that, that. I said, okay, well. And then a time went by and she contacted me again. She said, can you help me? Can you? I said, well, Allah already opened one door for you. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know if it's going to open again, you see.
Yeah.
So Allah
It's like
opens
Shakespeare.
doors. Allah opens doors, you see, brother.
Yeah.
And if you don't take action, if you don't enter, you don't take advantage of those opportunities, it's gone. That door closes and you're left in the dust. And I know many people who are left in the dust. So
Yeah.
you get your group together, choose a leader, choose a place to stand, and do the best you can to live the best you can and perform the most deeds you can, because this is a great time to perform good deeds for each other. You see,
Yes.
it's a great time to do it. You might
Yeah.
as well accumulate them, and don't start counting up all your bad deeds. Just do as many good deeds as you can, and
That's right.
ask Allah to forgive you all the things. First, as I said, go back to the beginning of my answer, tawbah. Ask Allah to forgive you,
Yes.
all right, for purchasing, the grace of your bad leaders rather than His grace. So if you
Yes,
want
sir.
his grace, you've got to ask him for it under the right conditions. You just can't expect him to give it to you. And there are
Yes,
certain things that come first, you see.
yes.
So, in
You
any
remind
case,
me,
brother,
brother.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was going to say
that's,
that you remind me of a quote from Shakespeare when you
uh-huh,
said that, what you're talking about. I forget what part is. I think it's in Hamlet. He said, "There's a tide in the affairs of men, taken at the flood, and it's bound in shallows and in misery. And on such a full sea was he now afloat. And you have to take the current now or lose the issue." So he was
yes,
talking about man is on a ocean and it's turbulent and it's riding, and a man has to take the tide when it serves. Like if not, you're
that's
gonna
right.
be lost at sea.
That's right. That's right.
And so
So,
that's where we are now. So yeah,
yeah.
I just thought he mentioned that. Yeah, it
So
reminded me of that.
you tell your friends and prepare for action, and then take the right approach to action, dear brother. Thank you very
Thank you so
much
much, brother.
for joining us. Wassalamu
Thank you.
alaikum, brother.
Lovely.
Wa alaikum salam. Ramadan Mubarak.
Walaikum wassalam.
See if we have another question. Men and women are already divided before even conjoining in a marriage. Is this perhaps the teaching of Harut and Marut, our work? If it is, has it proliferated to such a level? How do we learn so that we might distinguish and avoid this magic?
Oh dear. Well, that's that's a big question, and I don't think a few minutes here is going to serve to answer it because it's an ancient problem and it's an ancient question and it's an ancient, well, there's an ancient solution. Um, the marriage, how shall I say this, is half the deen, according to our prophet. But I say it's more than that. Not that I know more than our prophet, God forbid, but I'm taking this a step further, you see. Because if the deen and the proper approach to the deen is found first in marriage, then the rest of the deen proceeds from that. So all is marriage, all is family, all is kinfolk, all that proceeds out of marriage contributes to the welfare of the community, not the mosque. There's a difference here because the joining of the man and woman in marriage, this wisal, I think is the word in Arabic, Wisal, if I've got that, if I remember it correctly. That's the proper word, you see, this joining is that is the mosque, you see. Why do I say that? Because marriage reflects God's love for us. He designed it. He designed its trial and he designed its bliss. You see, you can't have one without the other. And if you want the bliss, you better overcome the trials. And what happens is people give up on the trials and they still go after the bliss without and not expecting trials. You see, Allah designed this. Now, what are we talking about? We're talking about the sense of touch, aren't we? Yes. Yeah, we're talking about the sweet caresses. And now, all right, let's. Oh, where are you going with this, Dr. Omar? I'm trying to cover an awful lot of ground, metaphysically and physically, in just a few moments. So bear with me. I just wrote a book on this, so it's not like I'm unprepared. I'm probably more than prepared, but it's still not an easy question to answer. Imagine yourself without the sense of touch. Imagine not being able to feel anything, taste, sound. All the vibrations that we hear, they come from sound vibrations. They touch our tympanic membrane, and that sets off a neurological reaction, and thus we hear. Okay. When you have a baby in your arms and you're going, oh, and you're touching the baby, you're caressing the baby, that baby is responding to that touch. That is sexual in nature, whether you want to admit that or not. It's sensual, and it prepares the ground for what is sexual. 20 years later, it's already there. It's all built into the schema. It's all built into the core of things, to the heart of the essence of being human. Without touch, we cannot experience Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't know. We wouldn't know. We wouldn't be able to know that we exist without touch. So all of this is sensual. Everything that we have with respect to our existence here in this realm is sensual. Sensual. Senses. We have all these senses. Touch is one of them. Touch involves the whole body. Our entire body, all of our skin is a sexual organ. The sex response system is tied into the entire integument of this human body. That sac that covers the flesh, the fat, and the blood, and whatever else is in there that we don't want to know about. You see, it's all there. And we take all of this for granted. And we take that as for granted as and we take our spouses for as much granted as we take our existence for granted. And we never seem to stop and thank God for the bliss. He designed it that way. Why? Because it represents his love for us. I'm not the first to respond in this way or to think about it or suggest that this is reality. You know, there are others amongst the Muslim intelligentsia far greater than I. People like Rumi and others of his stature who worked this all out hundreds of years ago. And I'm sure they weren't the first. Sexual relations represent God's love for us. It's holy. It's reserved for him and him alone. He designed it to demonstrate our being and his love and respect and care for our being through the services, the attentions, the favors of a spouse, whether male or female. So don't let chauvinism ruin it. Oh, well, that's what Muslims have done, isn't it? Of course they have. They have violated the mosque of marriage. What do you think the prophet said? Pray before you have sex? Is that the end of it? I pray when I'm having sex. It's a temple. I've just entered the temple. And why not thank God for it? And say Alhamdulillah and share that gratitude with my spouse at that moment. It's holy. That is salat. That is connection. Okay? It's holy. And it's more important than going to the mosque and kissing a rug. I'm telling you right now. It's more important. So if you want to save this union, first of all, you have to approach it with the right mindset. And this all has to do with guidance. Muslims have not been guided with respect to marriage, not at all. When's the last time the Imam sat down and had a good talk with you about marriage and how to please your wife or how to please your husband? Anybody sit down and teach you these things? No. Well, the body knows, but the body still needs to have, the mind still needs to have confirmation. The mind still needs to be guided. Well, how do I do this? How do I do that? And is this okay? Is that okay? Is that not okay? And what what is this all about? These conjugal rights are all about being joined in the most intimate relationships possible in the flesh. And this intimacy expresses Allah's own desire for intimacy with us. He designed it that way. You don't get more intimate with Allah than you do with your wife. It's impossible. And those who think that they can get more intimate with Allah are in dangerous territory. Dangerous territory. All of your most reliable of the saints told their students not to come back until they were married. You're not ready, you see. And if you looked at the webinar last True Guidance 002 from last week, I explained it there. It has to do with reaching maturity. Marriage has everything to do with reaching maturity. And this trial of conjugal bliss and the maintenance of conjugal bliss requires discipline. It requires taqwa, and that is far more than kissing a rug and saying Alhamdulillah. It requires knowledge, requires wisdom, requires patience, it requires fortitude, it requires faithfulness. All of these things, all of these attributions, which are part of the 100 names or the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He requires them first with your spouse before he requires them with you. Marriage is the mosque. Marriage is the mosque of proving whether or not you can mature into a tree, mature into this regenerate man wherein wisdom and knowledge can rest and build their nests, as I said in last week's webinar. Yeah. So Muslims have taken the wrong approach to marriage. They consider women sexual objects. No, that's only part of what a woman is. You're a sexual object as well to her, just as easily as she is to you. That's just a fundamental given. That's not the end. That's not the purpose, just to satisfy your lust. No, the purpose of marriage is to satisfy Allah's design, to satisfy intimacy with Him. And you're off pretending to be so holy and pious, kissing a rug in the mosque while your wife is at home taking care of the kids and doing all the suffering for you. No. That is not Islam. Islam, the deen, is at home. It's not in the mosque. The Prophet did not have a mosque. He had a sort of a yard there with a wall and a group of shabby rooms in which his wives lived. That was not a mosque. Everyone's calling it a mosque. You got the wrong idea. That was his home. He slept with his wives. He enjoyed their attentions and their favors there, in the same place where he prayed with the first Muslims. That was his home. He lived there. It was not a mosque. You can call it a mosque if you want to. But what we have now as mosques are taken after the fashion of the pagan and Christian ideals, temples and churches. You see? No, they weren't. That's not what it is. Yeah, you can do all the sociological studies about a community center and everything and attribute it to some sort of temple, or whether it's a pagan or Jewish temple, or whether it's a Christian church. Yeah, those are all social centers. But is that what the example that the Prophet gave us? No, he gave us the example of marriage and prayer in the home. That's what he gave us. That's the Sunnah. Okay, so you can argue with me if you like, but I'm not one to argue. So I'm going to tell you, if you want to understand marriage, um, and it's the real approach to marriage, I've spent a lot of time talking about this, and maybe we should have webinars just on marriage, and that's probably a good thing to do. But I'm going to suggest that you read my books. There's a new book coming out now, next month, inshallah, called Sexology for the Wise, okay, and explains everything to do with marriage, its purpose, the science behind it, the spiritual realities behind it, the problem with the LGBT movement, and the problem and how that's related to wickedness and organized evil that many people call the New World Order, the Illuminati, whatever you want to call it. It's all ancient, goes back to uh, fertility cult religions thousands of years ago that involved human sacrifice and cannibalism, which is what Christians do, when they have their, oh my God, oh yeah, okay. Well, it's what they do when they eat their God during communion, isn't it? They sacrifice him, then they eat him. Well, this is an old ancient pagan ritual that has to do with fertility rites. And this is what has destroyed marriage. Because the two serpents that go up the caduceus of the medical symbol, those are male and female aspects of what they call the one God. And I told this to you in 2 webinars ago. All right, that is the fertility cult symbol that now sits on top of the mosque. It's represented by the star and crescent. So if you want guidance about marriage, you're not going to get it there because they've resubmitted themselves to pagan idolatry. You see, the angels are not going to enter there. They're not going to give them the answers that you're seeking, which is why you're here, and which is why Allah has answered some of my prayers so that I can maybe teach what little I do know. And I'm hope. See, some people mistake certainty for arrogance. I'm not arrogant. I'm certain. And that's a big difference. There's a very big difference. Okay. So read that book when it comes out, Sexology. I also wrote another book called The Taqwa of Marriage, and I'm reissuing that book in a smaller form as a marital guideline, sort of a booklet, a bedside booklet for married couples so that they could remind each other who they really are in the eyes of Allah towards each other. Okay. And then hopefully, with the help of God, those books will bring some healing into the Ummah. I've had a couple of people. One person in particular told me years ago that my book, The Taqwa of Marriage, should be mandatory reading in all marriage counseling and marriage courses. So I think I hit some important aspects there. I certainly have not answered all of your question. I've only touched the surface of it. Okay. There is a war against marriage. It's been going on for a long time now. And it didn't just start with the Jews or the Frankfurt School of the last 150 years. It started with the Catholic Church and their demand that their priests remain celibate and their demand that men remain monogamous. Okay. Not that I'm a proponent of polygamy, but it has its time and place. Time and place. And it's conditional, you see. So these people have been warring against God's purpose in marriage for an awful, awful long time. And this war preceded Harut and Marut. They just, the people who followed them and understood what they were teaching, took it to heart and disobeyed their warning not to put these things into practice. So, with that being said, if you read my books, on marriage, and we maybe have some more webinars about this, then perhaps we can begin to bring some healing to the area, because people are making many, many mistakes. I certainly made my share of mistakes. I've made my share of marital mistakes, and that's one of the reasons I've studied it so carefully, you see. So we'll put that question to rest right now, Brother Nazakat, and move on to the next one. Thank you very much.
This is a long one as well, so you just bear with me. So, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Omar Zaid. May Allah's blessing be with you and your loved one always. Just few tidbits about myself. I'm from Malaysia, who is one of the few thousands that resisted the government's evil plan of forcing the vaccine. And I studied at IIUM for my bachelor degree almost a decade ago, which I have a love-hate feeling for. My question is a bit of a tangent, but I would love to hear your opinions on apostasy in Islam and the punishment of death for such deed, which some people considered barbaric. I heard story of a relative who has done so, but I couldn't completely blame that person since her own father doesn't sound like a good Muslim either. And everyone around her completely shunned her after that, and I heard no news of her since more than 10 years ago, but the situation bugs me to this day. I hope to hear your 2 cents on this very sensitive issue.
Well, um, this is not something that I've given much thought to. I've given some thought to it in the past. I did live in Malaysia for quite some time, and apostasy is something that is not just outward, it's also inward. And many of the people who accuse others of apostasy have committed uh, inward apostasy themselves and are guilty of major, major crimes. I like the story in the New Testament where a woman is brought to Isa and accused of adultery, and said the priests, Sadducees, Pharisees said, "Well, the penalty is death." And what do you say, Isa? And Isa stood up, and maybe he didn't stand up. He said, "Well, whoever of you is without sin, you cast the first stone." You see. Now, I'll just answer this very briefly because it's a complicated question, and personally, I don't believe in the death penalty for apostasy. That's my own personal opinion. I'm not a legalist in any stretch of the imagination, and I would have to look into if I were to ask to judge such a situation, I would have to, like any good doctor, I would want to know the patient's complete history, at what it is that brought her to that moment. And I'm going to tell you that I can say with a fair degree of certainty that the example of the leaders in her community brought her to apostatize, because they made such a poor example of Islam that she wanted to leave it. And I can tell you this, I lived in Malaysia for 15 years, and had it been, had my conversion depended upon the Malay example of what it was to be a Muslim, I never would have converted. So the sins that are being committed there are grave, and the hypocrisy is even graver. And that's the worst of sins. I think these people, the hypocrites, are going to be suffering some of the worst of the hellish torments to come. May God have mercy on them and cause them to repent and get serious about what it is that they're doing. I would say that this woman needs the grace and mercy of Allah more than others because of the sins of her fathers and her mothers. That would be my opinion, without knowing the details, which you've not given. I could go on, but I choose not to. Thank you very much. Next question, Brother Nazaka.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Omar. As you are aware, history is written by the victors, the controllers, the Illuminati, in order to keep us controlled and programmable. What are your thoughts on Tartaria, mud floods, and ancient architecture which clearly was not built by people living in 1800 with horse and buggy? Where do giants fit into our history, as these huge old world buildings appear to be built by and for giant people?
Well, I'm certainly aware that history is rewritten by the victors, and I'm also aware that revisionists who finally do come across the truth are often ignored. And many of these things, there was no mud flood that covered the whole world, so forget about that. And Tartaria, I'm not familiar with that. Giants, I'm a bit familiar with. There were giants. Um, Many of the stories that we've gotten that reached us from the last couple of hundred years are frauds, but not all of them. There are accounts of giants in scriptural and parascriptural uh, accounts that are quite tenable. But where do they fit in our history? Um, I don't think it's a question or even answers that have much to bear on the present situation that we find ourselves in. These are matters of interest, but they are not vital. And the things over which we might differ, some things that I think are important that you do think I don't think are important that you think are important, or it's a matter of inclination. Uh, it's a matter of being sympathetic or antipathetic to, not necessarily a matter of truth or falsehood. You see, so these matters will all be answered in the time to come. They're not necessarily important to be answered now. And I'll warn many people that instead of preparing for the urgent um, affairs that are upon us right now, people are being preoccupied with these things, and quite on purpose, you see, because it takes their mind and therefore their thoughts and their willpower away from doing what is necessary. Now, if you were to ask this question to an Amish farmer or a Mennonite farmer who live within, just a few miles from me, they would look at me. If I were to go and ask them about this, they would look at me and say, maybe even take their head off, scratch their head and say, why in God's name are you asking me such a question? I've got a field to plow. Okay. I've got to change the horse on my shoe's foot. He's gone lame. I've got a crop to bring in. I've got an orchard to fertilize, and I've got chickens to roost and cows to milk. And why are you bothering yourself with such inane nonsense? I got things to do. Please go away. And I'll tell you that farmer will probably never take me seriously again, unless he finds me naked and bleeding on the side of the road, like the Good Samaritan found uh, a Jew and rescued him. You see. Then after he'd rescued me, he'd take me home and give me back to my wife and go on back to his field and plow his own field. So my advice to you, dear brother or sister, go plow your field. You got more important things to do. Next question, brother.
How is brands like Nike, who represent false goddesses Alat, affect our spirituality and prayer when we wear them? Some imams say it's no problem to wear because it is not worship today. What is your take on it, Brother Omar?
Well, if it wasn't worship today, it would not be used, you see. Worship is a thing that it means to obey. It doesn't mean to just bow down and make a prayer or dua or whatever the case might be. Worship means to obey in the original context of the Gestalt understanding of the word. It entails obeying the thing that you honor. Okay, so if you're honoring this thing, and what do I mean by honor? Well, you're paying money for it, right? Yeah, and this is ancient goddess worship, and goddess worship is what has brought us into the terrible situation that we're in today. Uh, and goddess worship has brought us the Lady of New York Harbor. She's brought us the Columbia, the state of Columbia, the District of Columbia, you see, uh, Columbiana, the European goddess, and brought us all these goddesses that people are, the leaders, the world leaders are using these icons to mind meld the masses with them so that the masses just become like worker bees and feed them. This is the essence of what's it called? Spinning yarn into gold. You see, the masses are making gold for the people who oppress them and lie to them. So your imams who are saying these things are probably praying under the star and crescent of the same goddess. You see, and does it matter? I think it does. You know, when's the last time you met an angel in the masjid? Okay. I'm not talking about jinn or demons, whatever they are, who pretend to be angels because they do. Uh, and so it's important not to support the things that dishonor Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I can tell you right now, Nike dishonors the truth, and Allah is the truth. So take them off. When I stopped watching television, I didn't bother to sell the thing. I threw it in the rubbish bin. It's the same form of idolatry. Don't be caught dead in a Nike. Next question, please.
Dr. Omar, a lot of Muslims are submitting to the devil's ideology in your ignorance. I have seen many who are apparently so innocent and very pious in the sense of ibadah, but deaf don't know. I think that's saying definitely don't know they are serving the devil. Where do you think such people stand in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Are they likely to be condemned to hell for their innocent ignorance?
Well, I have done some lectures on ignorance, and these are part of my campfire talks. Uh, Brother Kamal, if you're still with us, you can run that little um, link so people can get access to them. I've covered this topic very thoroughly on the knowledge crisis and other lectures in my campfire talks. And the bottom line of ignorance is that ignorance serves evil under ignorant leadership. Okay. You can have an ignorant person who serves a good and righteous master. Okay. And that master could be informed. I mean, look, Ibrahim, if we believe some of the traditions, he had at least 300 servants. And I'm sure they were not all well informed individuals, but they followed Ibrahim, you see. And so they served him. And so their ignorance under those circumstances could not possibly serve evil. But if you are serving ignorant imams, and most of your imams are in that condition because they're poorly informed about world history, they're poorly informed about how it is that they're manipulated and being manipulated. And COVID is just sheer contemporary evidence of that manipulation and their ignorance. So if you're following them and they're ignorant, it's just like the prophet said, you're going to follow the Christians and the Jews right into the lizard's hole. And he used the word lizard because the lizard is cold-hearted. And the lizard is purely self-serving. So that means you're going to follow them into a self-serving condition. And that's something which borders on salvation, the line of salvation, isn't it? Because if your faith is in the community and you're following the community thinking that your salvation is there rather than your salvation is with Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you have a problem, not just here, but also hereafter. Because there is indications that in the hereafter, you're going to be ordered to follow the people that you followed here. And I think there's a hadith to that effect given by the Prophet himself. Now, I'm not a hadith man, but when the hadith fits in with the Quran and what I know of the scriptural truths of guidance, I'd say, well, that's a pretty good bet that that's what's going to happen. But Allah knows best. And I'm sure that I'm in no position to condemn anybody. But Allah is, and I would not risk it. You see, when I finally realized after years of patient observance and investigation how misguided and how ignorant the imams were, I stopped going to masjid. I stopped praying behind them. Especially after I read a hadith to that effect, that in the hereafter you will follow who you followed here. And when I saw them following and leading their people into hellishness, and when I saw them tolerating sins and crimes against their women and children, I refused to follow them anymore. And when I saw them continuing to blame Muslims for 9/11, I stopped following them because I knew they were ignorant and I knew they could not be corrected. And one of the reasons they can't be corrected is they refuse to do tawbah. That's why I challenged imams in my last webinar, if you're praying under the Star and Crescent, have the courage to go up there and knock that thing down like Abraham would have. Knock it down and see what happens to your community. See what happens to you. Yeah? I dare say very few people will answer that challenge. Very few people have the courage to do what is necessary and to practice that form of tawbah, because that's what it is. And if your leaders are not going to do that, then what are the ignorant people going to do? They're still following them. And so if they say, well, take the vaccine, they take the vaccine. Give it to your children, give it to your children. And if they suffer the adverse effects from it, well, whose fault is that? I always use the example of the woman who gets in the car with the drunk husband, with her children. And then they get an accident and the kids are killed. Whose fault is that? The drunk husband's or the woman's? Who is the death angel going to consult the husband? No, he's going to consult the woman. She made the decision to get into the car. Oh, I was afraid. You fear man more than you fear Allah? Yes, that's what the ignorant people are doing. And so don't blame their ignorance on their lack of courage to gain knowledge and to do the right thing. Don't confuse the two. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon the ignorant people on the day of judgment. Ameen. Next question, please.
Dr. Umar, if I have a choice to go back to my own country in case of the impending doom or stay here in US, where I find no Muslim community that is prepared to battle the Dajjalic control. Thank you.
I'm not sure I understand that question. I will try to manage it. I've answered this partially with Brother Rosario about 30 minutes ago, or maybe more now. I've lost track of the time. You can't think about going back to your country. You can't think in terms like that. You have to think in terms of doing what Allah guides you to do. And this is something that this is an area that people make mistake often. They decide to do something and then they say it's Allah's will. No. You wait for Allah's will to be made known and clear to you, and then you do what needs to be done. And if you don't know what needs to be done, don't do anything. Just stay where you are. So my advice to you, dear brother or sister, is to do istikhara, okay? And, not in terms of Ramadan. I'm talking in terms of getting nitty-gritty personal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for you. A specific question. Allah, what is it that you want me to do here and now? Shall I go or shall I stay? Show me a sign. Something to that nature, you see? But do the fasting and the prayer with that in mind. And on the third night, you ask that question. Make it clear. Allah will answer. I've done it and I've got the answers in the past. Yeah. Next question, please.
Elite circles have been transforming their sons into daughters, and their daughters into sons for centuries in the deluded belief to unite female and male principles within one being. But it's only now for a few decades that they have had mass media to promote their ways internationally and affect the minds of everyone. Baphomet, which is a symbol often referred to in transgender symbology, is an androgynous character bearing the characteristics of female and male, where separate forces are in equilibrium. As above, so below. The concept of androgyny in occult philosophy would be representing the highest level of initiation in the quest of unifying with God. Most people, including Muslims, are unaware of the occult religion of androgyny, and then it ends.
I see. Well, this is not a question. This is a statement, one which I agree with. This is what's happened. And in my book on sexology, I make this very, very clear. I go into the history of it. It is one of the base elements of the Kabbalah and the mystery religions of old. And you only need to look at the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor to see the androgynous male. That's not a woman. Okay? I don't know what that creep is, but that's one of the first things I'd be destroying if I had if I was Genghis Khan at the present age. So I think we'll take one more question and then call it a day, because we've been at this for a long time now, and people do get tired. I will ask you this: if you want to continue with Q&A next week, let us know, and we'll arrange for this to go on next week before I go on into any other um, topics having to do with true guidance. So just tell write down in your chat box, yes, we would like to have some more Q&A next week, and we'll go ahead and arrange for it. Oh, okay. Well, then let's call it an end here. I think it's a good session. And I want to thank everybody for attending. Some very good questions. I hope I gave some decent answers, inshallah. And I wish you all a good week, a good day. Until next time we meet online. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Amin.